Hi, welcome to Link Internationally, a multilingual podcast where we are learning internationally and networking the kingdom. There were more than 6.9 million international students in 2022, and that figure is constantly growing. I'm Anza, your host. I invite you to join me as I discover the inspiring physical and spiritual journeys of international students as they share their personal, life-changing experiences with us. These stories enable us to enlarge our vision of what God has been doing in and through international student migration around the world in order to make His name known among the nations.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Link Internationally. Today I have the pleasure of welcoming Clara, who comes from Brazil. When I think of Brazil, the first image that comes to mind is Rio de Janeiro. I know it's far from being the country's only incredible city, but it's the one that instantly pops into my head. And I also remember a feijoada that a friend introduced me to in France. It was absolutely delicious. And today we want to move beyond stereotypes and hear directly from Clara about her story, her childhood, the joys and challenges of growing up in Brazil, and her journey here in France, and of course, how faith has accompanied her every step of the way. Clara, a very warm welcome to you. We're really happy to have you with us today.
Hello, Anja. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure for me to be here, and I'm happy for the opportunity to talk to you today about my story.
So, Clara, to start us off, take us back to your roots. Where in Brazil did you grow up, and what is that region like?
So I grew up in Brumadinho, which is a small town in the state of Minas Gerais, which is in the southeastern of Brazil. It's a region that is surrounded by nature, mountains. There are waterfalls, rivers, and beautiful landscapes. A lot of families in Brumadinho are connected to the mining industry in some way, or they are working nearby cities such as the capital, which is Belo Horizonte. Brumadinho is a town that everyone knows each other. To give you an idea, people often identify you through your parents. I was known as I was growing up as the daughter of Toninho Jesus. So my father was known as, and my father was known as Toninho Jesus because he was always speaking about Jesus. So
Oh, wow. That's amazing. Toninho Jesus. Okay, so what kind of child and teenager were you? What did you love doing in your free time? What was life like at home, and what memories stand out from school and friendships?
when I was a kid in the 2000s, I'm 29 years old now, life was calmer. There in Brumadinho, everyone knew each other, the streets were quiet. We would spend a lot of time playing outside or at my grandma's house. We were very close to the nature as well, so we would go to waterfalls, farms. There were big backyards with fruit trees like jabuticaba. It's a small Brazilian fruit that tastes like berries, or mango trees. There weren't so many organized activities for kids as people have now. We mostly played and created our own games. And about my family, my parents, they were both teachers. They were also leaders in the local church. So they always had a strong passion for evangelism. For example, it was my father who first brought the gospel to the town, to Brumadinho, and he would preach from house to house many years ago. And that's how actually he met my mother and the church started. And when I was a kid, talking more now about Brumadinho itself, it was a safe place and I could go to school on my own. As I said, everyone knew everyone. We would walk 3 kilometers, do everything by walk because we didn't have a car. So to go to church, we just walk 3 kilometers, hills and going up and down hills. And they would always look to see if someone who knew might pass and give us a lift, which quite often would happen. So also, since my family didn't have much financial means. I didn't travel as a child. Until I was 14, I only knew Brumadinho and Belo Horizonte, which is the capital. And I had never seen the sea, I had never seen Rio de Janeiro. And it was when I was a teenager that I started to become more curious about traveling in other countries since I was exposed to it through my older sister, Angelica. She worked for a missionary organization and lived in different countries such as Portugal and Albania. So I traveled through her stories, and that started sparkling my curiosity. So it was when I started dreaming of one day studying abroad.
I see. So, is there a particular story or moment from your childhood and teenage years that captures what everyday life looked like for you back then?
As I said, I was raised in a Christian family. So to give a bit more context, we are a family of 5 kids. I have a twin sister. We are the youngest. And if I think of my childhood, it's very much connected to the Bible. From a very young age, my parents taught us to love the Bible, to read, to study. And I remember seeing my dad praying on his own for hours and study the Bible every day. So it was through this example that I started to love my daily time with the Lord, praying and also reading the Bible. Since I was a very young child with my twin sister, Elisa, we both loved reading. We started with a Bible for kids when we just learned to read, and we were 7 or 8. And then there was one year that we read the same Bible 40 times. We had all these stories by heart. We could tell to everyone in Bible school. And then we finally thought, okay, now we are ready to read the adults' Bible. And this was when we were around 10 years old, yeah. And then we decided to read the whole Bible from the start to finish that year, and we did it. It was amazing, this experience.
What would you say defines it best? And now that you've been living in France, what cultural differences have surprised you or stood out the most?
What I love the most about Brazilian culture is the people. They are very friendly, very kind. And one of the things that makes my culture special is hospitality, I would say. So, for example, at home and growing up, it was totally normal to have guests just showing up out of the blue. There were no need to schedule visits in advance. Our house was always full. My mom would always cook more than enough because she would feel the need to always feel prepared and ready to welcome anyone who would come and announce it. So there was also always a good coffee, pão de queijo, which is a cheese bread made out of manioc flour, cakes. Then this would always accompany the conversations and visits. So I grew up in this warm environment. There was always a strong sense of community between family, neighbors, friends. There was not so much individualism. I don't remember times in my childhood that I was alone. Life also had a slower rhythm. There was not so much sense of urgency. And if I compare this to what I observed in France, I saw that people tend to be more reserved at first. It seems for me that it takes more time to build deeper connections. But if I compare to Brazil, I also noticed a very strong attachment to the culture, to the language, traditions, from meals to how people greet each other. One thing that caught my attention when I first arrived and was learning French was the use of vous and tu. So in French, I have to, still now, I have to constantly remind myself to use vous when I'm speaking to someone I don't know well. While in Brazil, would always use two words, the word você. to refer to someone, even if you just met the person. So it's more informal, the culture. This example just highlights how the relationships with others can feel a bit different between the two countries.
So let's talk about you moved to France. 5 years ago, you received a scholarship to study here. And after your master's degree, you continued with a PhD that you've just completed. Congratulations, Clara. And can you first share with us maybe how you ended up in France?
Thank you. Yes, before I can give a bit more of context. So, thinking back of my childhood and teenagerhood, I had the dream by observing my parents and my sisters and brother to become a full-time missionary. My parents, they were leading a missionary organization. They are still leading in our region, which involves evangelist outreach in underprivileged towns. And I was leading the kids ministry in this mission. So I thought I have to serve the Lord. I would really have to be intentionally a full-time in a mission organization. But at the same time, I have always loved science, being curious. I loved studying, and I loved some things that are not so easy to think of a good use in a traditional missionary field, I would say, like mathematics, physics, chemistry. But I would pray that God will use my gifts and talents, and I would like to study, to grow in maturity. And I knew that I came to understand over time that God, as a loving father, would shape this desire of my heart in alignment to His. I'd have this Psalm 37:4 in my heart. Delight yourself in the Lord, and He'll give you the desires of your heart. So, with that in mind, I joined the university. Studied materials engineering and in the university in Belo Horizonte. Back then, it was a I got a full scholarship, and it was paid by the government in a very renewed institution. I saw that as the beginning of God's blessing to this journey. And during my undergraduate years, I would always pray that God would use my studies so that I could serve Him. And I also became curious about other cultures, and I wanted to study abroad as well. So in my final year of the bachelor, I started applying for scholarships in Europe. That meant that I had a year to prepare to improve my English. Back then it was not a good English. And I studied by myself to pass in the language exam. And after a long period of preparation, with some closed doors in between, I was selected for an Erasmus program, which was called Mama Self. It was a master program with specialization in material science, and it was international, so that would took me to several countries. I was very happy that I could study and also travel during 2 years. So I spent my first year in Rennes, in France, from 2020 to 2021. Then I went to Germany for an internship. Then I went to Italy for a semester there. I studied in Torino. And finally, I returned to France to complete my master thesis. And then this time I was in Grenoble. And then when I presented my master thesis work, I was doing I did a master thesis in a particle accelerator called European Synchrotron. And when I presented the work, I got an open door by a professor who was listening to it, and she offered me a PhD position in her group in the same institute. So that's how I ended up here now in Grenoble. I just finished my PhD in physics at the University of Grenoble Alps. And I carried just for context, but I carried the fundamental research on radioactive elements, which is studying using the synchrotron facility in Grenoble.
So, wow, wonderful. So, before leaving Brumadinho, Belo Horizonte, Brazil, what expectations or fears did you have? Did you carry any stereotypes or cliche about France or French people, maybe?
Oh yeah, I carried some. And I had many fears. I was afraid of feeling lonely coming from this warm culture, and also afraid of not adapt to the culture in France, and fears about the language. I didn't have a good level of French. I About the stereotypes, I had this idea that French people are cold. I also carried some cliches about the food, good ones. Also, this strong attachment to the language, to the traditions, and so on. And over time, came to understand both cultures and appreciate, I mean, there are similarities in both cultures and also the difference, but appreciating both, like French and Brazilian.
And thinking back to your first days there, here, is there a memorable moment, maybe a funny story or expected kindness that stayed with you?
Yeah, in fact, when I arrived in France in the 2020, it was in the beginning of the pandemic, and 2 months after my arrival, the government announced a lockdown. And at that time, I was living in a student residence. My room was only 9 square meters. So the idea of being confined there felt quite overwhelming. And as soon as lockdown was announced on TV, I received a message from a woman at the church I was attending, and she told me that she was praying and I came to her mind. And then, together with her husband, they offered me their home so that I could spend lockdown with them, no matter how long it would take. So that was very, very special to me because I was far from my family in a foreign country, had just arrived, and this is in uncertain time. And then suddenly there was this unexpected care, and it reminded me of what everything that I had grown up with, the hospitality of my parents, the way that our home was always open to others. And in that moment, it felt as if I was receiving this same care. And it was for me a very concrete evidence that within the Christian community, cultural differences are not actually that big. So I realized that I could find shelter and friends and a family wherever I was because it's the Lord who takes care of me ultimately.
And how does your faith continue to give you hope and strength? We live in a world that is so uncertain and times can feel uncertain. So, how does it help you?
The word continues to be my daily nourishment. So every morning when I wake up or in my time of Bible reading and praying, that sustains me. I also have learned over these years to really pray without ceasing, to integrate prayer. I mean, in everything that I do, including my work, like developing small habits that help me to remember to be grateful and that everything comes from the Lord, not only praying before meals, for example, but also before reading a paper, asking for understanding, before sending an email, or before giving a presentation at work. These are small, simple gestures, but they remind me that I'm not alone and the Lord is present in every detail of my life.
Yes, he is indeed. And have there been moments when you realized that God was using your story or your journey to encourage others or draw them closer to Him?
Yeah, I believe that this happens especially when we open our homes and invite others to share life with us. I try to follow the what I learned from my parents and bring it here to my life in France, bringing this hospitality that I learned from them. So one example is in the small group that I lead in my home, for example, I would always pray that God would bring the ladies that that would really need this sense of encouragement and that would start seeing through the way that I live, also learn how to love the Bible and that we would encourage each other. So I would invite both believers, non-believers, sometimes people that just discover that I'm a Christian, are curious at my work, and they would some would say no, of course, some would come, and the ones that came, we created a very special bond. for more than 3 years. I remember one student that she came to our group, and she was not a believer, she was a student. And when she came, she openly said that she would come only to ask questions. She knew I was scientist and she wanted to challenge. And then she didn't believe in Jesus as a son of God. I remember that was very challenging, her questions, and I was a bit upset. But over time and praying, and after she continued coming and sharing life together and having meals together every week, spending time in community and studying the word, her heart began to change and she eventually came to faith. And last year she was baptized. So for
Oh,
me,
wow.
yeah.
Finally, for everyone listening today, what message, encouragement, or piece of advice would you like to leave with them?
First, I'd like to thank you, Anja, for the opportunity to share my story. And I hope it encourages listeners to be eyewitnesses wherever they are, a testimony. In my case, the Lord used my curiosity and my passion for science as instruments to make His name known. But I do believe that He can use us wherever we are, which profession we have. So I hope that we all can be faithful stewards of the gifts and the talents that we have received, and that we would use them to love the Lord with all our heart, all our mind, and strength.
Clara, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your story with us. It's been a real joy and inspiration to hear your journey today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in. Before we go, I want to give a quick shout out to Scott, who handles all the technical side of the podcast and keeps everything sounding great. And to all our listeners, thanks again for your support. If you enjoyed the episode, don't forget to subscribe and share the podcast. And we'll see you next time for another great conversation. Remember, there is an episode in English every first and third Monday, and in French every second and fourth Monday. Until next time, take care, and remember, God is at work across borders.